विनय सर बस 10 सेकंड है ना, हम क्यू दे देंगे आपको। ओके सर, रेडी, आप जैसे स्क्रीन पर शुरू करना।
Good morning, everyone. I welcome everyone present here today for the research dialogue. Before we begin the session, I welcome our guest speaker, Dr. Pradeep Chibbar, Professor and Indo-American Community Chair in Indian Studies, University of California, Berkeley. I also welcome the excellent mind behind this program, Honorable Vice Chancellor, sir, Dr. Sandeep Shastri, who has brought everyone together for this dialogue. I welcome to all dean, director, heads, faculty members, and finally, lastly, I welcome to our dearest participants, research scholars. The purpose of this program to give an opportunity to our budding researchers to present their research ideas through their research work that they are pursuing. In these 2 days, we will be having the plenary session, concurrent session, breakout sessions, and faculty plenary sessions. I hope these 2 days will be fruitful and insightful for everyone, and that this may help to exchange viewpoints and pushing research boundaries to be interdisciplinary approach. Now, I would like to invite Dr. Shastri sir to enlighten us with the vision of research for this research dialogue program. Thank you.
Professor Pradeep Chibbar, my respected colleagues at Jagran Lake City University, and the doctoral students that we have at the university. It's indeed a special honor for me to welcome you all to this research dialogue that we have planned as an annual event at the Jagran Lake City University. Many institutions which have been ranked at A and A+ by NAC have used something similar to this as their best practice in the university, which has been applauded not only by NAC, but by UGC and all other bodies. So at Jagran, we have initiated this research dialogue as one of our good practices as a university. And as Dr. Joshi just now mentioned, the research dialogue has multiple objectives. Most important, it provides a platform at Jagran Lake City University for all those involved in research, either as guides or as researchers pursuing projects or as researchers doing a doctoral program. It gives a platform for all of them to come together and participate in a discussion. We were hoping to make this event offline, but then we decided to be a little more cautious, and this year we are having it online. We hope to make it offline from next year. What have we planned as part of this research dialogue? We have 3 plenary sessions, and this is the first plenary session where we have an inaugural plenary speaker in Dr. Pradeep Chibbar. Immediately after this session, we have another plenary session led by Dr. Vineet Kapoor, who is a serving senior civil servant, but has a PhD degree and has very, very, very strong academic credentials. And he's going to speak about how do we bring practitioners and academicians together on the same platform. And I'm sure we're going to have a very, very exciting dialogue there. And then we have a valedictory plenary tomorrow, where a very well-known management scholar, Dr. Mithileshwar Jha, who is very famous for his marketing book written along with Philip Kotler. He is joining us tomorrow in the afternoon to talk about research and intuition. So we have 3 plenary sessions, the current one, the next one, and the valedictory one tomorrow. Besides that, we have a faculty plenary session where simultaneously in journalism, in liberal arts, in law, in management and commerce, and in applied sciences, we will have one speaker coming in and having a dialogue with the participants. I'm very happy to report that our dialogue participants have not limited themselves to their faculty, by which I mean a law researcher or a law faculty has also thought maybe I should go to the faculty plenary in liberal arts. So it's not that each faculty plenary is limited to those from their field. There are people who have moved from other disciplines to the fields, therefore strengthening our focus on interdisciplinary research. We also have a breakout session tomorrow morning where 9 of our faculty who are guides and alumni of our PhD program will present to the participants different aspects of their own research experience. And the research dialogue participants have chosen one among the 9 sessions to participate in. Most importantly, this afternoon and tomorrow, we have a concurrent session for every faculty, one in law, one in journalism, one in liberal arts, one in management, and one in applied sciences, where doctoral students will present progress of their work. We have brought in one more innovation. We wanted to give an opportunity to some of our faculty who are doing their PhD in other universities to actually present progress of work in our research dialogue. So that is also happening. So from now to 5 o'clock tomorrow evening, there are a range of activities we are doing as part of the research dialogue. My only request to all the participants is, please make the best use of each of these sessions. Please log on to each sessions, remain active in each sessions, and participate enthusiastically in the deliberations of each session. This first session, the inaugural session, we could not think of a better speaker for this inaugural session than Dr. Pradeep Chibbar. It becomes very difficult for me to call him with all that official paraphernalia as Dr. Pradeep Chibbar, because for the last 30 years, I have only called him as Pradeep Bhai because he is like an elder brother to me. I have known Pradeep ji for the last 30 plus years. And as a researcher, as a colleague, and most importantly, as a friend. Dr. Pradeep Chibbar started his higher education in India. He was a product of Hindu College and then went on to the United States, went on to the University of California at Los Angeles, a very, very well-known institution, to pursue his PhD. He did his PhD from UCLA and then went on to teach first at Ohio State University as an assistant professor. He then moved to a very well-known university in Northern America called the University of Michigan at Ann Arbor, which is where I first met him. I still remember when I first met him, he intuitively said, "Come, I have a class today on caste and politics. I want you to speak in that class." And without any preparation, he just took me into his classroom and let me out among his students. And it was a great experience. Since then, Pradeep has moved from University of Michigan, Ann Arbor to the University of California at Berkeley, where he has been now, I think, for close to 2 decades. And one of the most celebrated professors on India who you can find in the United States, somebody who works in the United States, but is rooted, grounded, and understands Indian reality like anyone in India would. He may be teaching in a university outside India, but his ears and his vision and his mind are truly attuned to the ground reality in this country. Pradeep Chibbar also has been an institutional leader with regard to research. He has headed the South Asia Center at the university. He has headed the international office of the University of California at Berkeley in terms of collaboration. And whenever I've had a chance to meet him, he has been somebody who enthuses you to greater heights of learning. I must add, for the last 10 years, he has been, more than 10 years, for the last 20 years, he has been associated with Lokniti, which is the group which does election studies in India and survey-based studies in India. And I must say, for the last 12 years, Pradeep ji has been pro bono, coming to India, spending 1 month to train researchers in the analysis of quantitative data. Pradeep ji, I'm happy to tell you that Lokniti is planning to do next year's summer school at Jagran Lake City University. And we look forward to welcoming you here for that summer school, because your inputs will be very critical for that. Pradeep ji has agreed to speak today on institutional research culture. We had a long conversation last night, and and that shows the seriousness of the scholar. He wanted to know what is it that people here would like to be dialoguing on. And we discussed that last night, and he has prepared his presentation keeping that in mind. Thank you so much, Pradeep ji, for being with us. And I would now invite my colleagues at the Research Dialogue to benefit from the feast of ideas we are now going to hear from Pradeep ji.
Thank you, Vice Chancellor Shastri. And thank you, Dr. Joshi, for inviting me to Lake City University, Jagran Lake City University. It is a pleasure to be with all of you. I wish I could be there with you in person. And there is no way that I can live up to Dr. Shastri, both as a speaker as well as an intellectual. He likes, for whatever he may say, he is truly, I think, in the study of Indian politics, a giant in the field. And I think the rest of us are just trying to keep up with him and his research productivity. Dr. Shastri, or Sandeep Bhai, as I call him, asked me to speak to you and to speak about building an institutional research culture. And there are actually many, many ways to think about building an institutional research culture. And I'm going to take a very, very particular slice at it now, which is how do you motivate research among younger scholars? And I'm using PhD students just as an example, running example, but much of what I'm saying applies to people who are just beginning their research. That's one way to think about it, who want to initiate research. If you're interested, we can also have, during question and answer time, a conversation on how to build an institutional research culture for faculty who are not actually just starting their research careers, but people who are well-established researchers. How do you create a university in which research is a valued part of the entire institutional framework? So I'm going to take, my task today will be to speak about the first issue. Some of these issues carry over on both sides. But if you're specifically keen on, I will discuss how to build an institutional research culture more generally. But before being an academic and being a nerd, I need to define what do we mean by a research culture. So Andrew Cheatham in 2007 used this, and I actually changed the definition a little bit to my needs. I think a research culture makes research significant and allows an academic community and a university to value and to evaluate research activity. Both the valuing and evaluating have to happen simultaneously. You cannot have research that cannot be evaluated. It is only when it is evaluated is it valued. And it is evaluated by a community of scholars. Anytime Dr. Shastri or I write an article, and I'll speak about myself as a running example too, we send it for peer review. The peer reviews, as all of you know, are blind in the sense that they do not know who the author is, and I do not know who the reviewers are. And the purpose of the exercise is to evaluate the quality of my research. You may be surprised to know, even though I'm a senior professor, I've been teaching at the University of California at Berkeley for 21 years. Every 3 or 4 years, I'm evaluated on my research, my teaching, and my service to the university. And only then am I given a merit raise. Otherwise, I will not get a merit raise. So in other words, the valuing and evaluating of research is actually built into the fabric here. So the most important thing I want to talk about is, but what is this thing in the middle, this word called a university? And what does a university have to do with research? A university normally consists of there are 4 classes of people. Students who mostly take classes and will occasionally be involved in research, undergraduates, people doing their BA. There are faculty who teach and do research. And of course, the leadership and the administration. And all these 3 have to work in tandem to make successful research plausible and to make a research culture a reality. So let's begin with, why should you do research? I've just written why a PhD, or put simply, why should you do research? And quite frankly, there is only one reason to do research. It is intellectual curiosity and the thrill of discovery. If you don't have the intellectual curiosity and you don't have the thrill of discovery, don't do research. It is time consuming. It is painful. It is, to be honest, there are good days and there are bad days, even for me now, every day. But the fact of the matter is, there is such an intellectual curiosity and there's such a joy of being able to put things together, to discover new things, to find new things. And that is what has to drive you. Any question you ask, any research you do has to come from your heart. You have to believe in it because this is something you will be doing for days on end. When I write a book, I've written a few, it takes me 5 or 6 years from start to finish. When I write an article, it'll take me a year or maybe a year and a half. What does that mean? That I'm thinking about the same thing every day for many days on end and thinking about it hard. And if I'm not doing that, if I'm not intellectually curious, and I don't think I'm discovering something new or saying something new, why would I even wake up in the morning to do it every day? This is something you have to wake up to do, right? You have to enjoy doing what you're doing. So the first thing is intellectual curiosity and the thrill of discovery. And this is something I believe we can all do. There are no barriers to this. The barriers are only in ourselves. The barriers are in our minds. The barriers are in our emotions. There are no barriers, intellectual barriers or capability barriers. I have students of all kinds. Some, if you would say, are better prepared, some are worse prepared, but they all love engaging in this process of discovery and thinking aloud. So that's the first thing. It's not only a PhD, but what does research do? There are practical reasons for doing research also, right? Research does 2 things, I think. First, you always learn new things. Content knowledge improves. So, for instance, I'll give you personal examples and you feel free to stop and see, and I gave you particular. Right now, I'm working on a book on populism in India and Pakistan. And as I'm reading the history of both countries, I'm discovering things about India I did not know. We can talk about that. I'm also discovering things about Pakistan I did not know. So I'm discovering new things about both places. My content knowledge is improving. The other thing you need to do, which is research skills. And this is something I cannot stress enough, and I'm going to go through this extremely. I want us to think about this, and maybe I'll stop if I have Dr. Joshi's and Dr. Shastri's permission to stop here and see if people have any questions. What do I mean by research skills? Content knowledge is okay. So, we used to work, let's say, on political parties. If I now start working on religion, I need content knowledge on religion. If I start working on populism and leadership and charisma, I need information on leadership. What about research skills? Research skills is something that's really important. Disciplines change, people's approaches to disciplines change. So once again, using the example of the social sciences, there was a time in the social sciences when the most interesting and important work 150, 70 years ago was actually done by interviewing people, by talking to people, by figuring things out through conversations, what some people would call qualitative research. It's still important. In the 1950s and 60s, research became much more quantitative. In the 1980s, people started moving towards what you would call formal models of thinking, in which it was neither quantitative nor was it talking to people, but it was just thinking about things mathematically. And these days, the Nobel Prize were given to Esther Duflo and Abhijit Banerjee, largely for one thing, which is using new techniques called experiments to actually answer deep and important questions dealing with social policy, social behavior, economic policy, economic behavior, political outcomes. Which means that as a researcher, you have to be up to speed with the latest research skills, and you have to continually invest your mind as well as your talents in keeping abreast with the latest research skills and learning the latest research skills. Dr. Shastri may know this person. I remember I was an assistant professor at the University of Michigan, and I bumped into Dr. William Zimmerman. Dr. William Bill Zimmerman was the leading scholar of Russian politics. And his students are placed in all the major universities in the US at that point, Soviet politics, actually. There was the Soviet Union at that time. And he was the expert. So he looks at me and he says, Pradeep, things are getting tough. I said, why, Bill? He's a full professor in his 60s. He says, there are all these young Russians coming into the field. Their language skills are fabulous. Their knowledge of the land is fabulous. They know many things. I said, great. And then he looked at me and he says, and if I can't keep up, I should step out of the way. Because if he felt, even at that day and age, that you need to be up to speed with whatever the latest trends are, whatever the latest intellectual ways of thinking about things are, because you need to rejuvenate your own intellectual agendas. And to be honest, that's how I feel. I work with students. Some of their skills are far better than I, and I have to make sure that I understand what they're doing, especially if they're working on a PhD with me, because otherwise, how can I approve a PhD if I don't understand the method? And I have to be able to do it myself. So in other words, there has to be this continuous need to actually upgrade your research skills. And once you have the content knowledge and the research skills, it will lead to national and international recognition. But still, despite all these advantages of national recognition, international recognition, learning more stuff, the only reason for doing this, I cannot say this any more emphatically, is the intellectual curiosity and the thrill of discovery. You have to love this. You have to wake up in the morning and say, I want the answer to this question, and I want it in a way that will satisfy, tell everybody that I got it right, that I did it. And you have to have that sense of discovery and the sense of joy. That's what motivates good research. That's what motivates one to do a PhD. I want to stop and see if any have any. Is it okay to take questions, or Dr. Shastri and Dr. Joshi, I should just move on?
Colleagues want to ask Pradeepji a question, please unmute your mics and ask him the question, because Pradeepji wants to make it interactive. So if anybody has a question, please unmute yourself and ask a question. Requesting my dean here of journalism to say something, and then I hope others will get their questions ready by then.
Yes, sir.
Thank you so much. And I was at the venue where VC sir is here, so I thought I'll come here only and ask you a question. You know, what I caught on to it, Pradeep ji, at the end of it is what you said about this intellectual curiosity. And I think, you know, I don't know if I have this as a question, but more as a poser of it. But my sense is the moments we get into this frame of mind of being curious about things, about deep diving into things which seem very, very interesting to us on the face of it, certainly we start getting various questions which our mind would not have thought about it. So many times I've heard my colleagues and my, you know, my some of the researchers telling what is the kind of a questions we need to ask. Or whenever they are creating a, you know, set of questionnaires for data collection, they always have a you know, kind of a query to say what questions should we be asking to lead to this particular premise. And my always, you know, I always think about it. I say that the moment you start thinking about curiosity, about getting into it without even having a set of questions to start with, the moment you deep dive, you start getting questions which your mind has never thought about. So, sir, do you think, you know, not getting bogged down with a set of questions that we have to ask is a great situation to be when we start, you know, researching about any topic or any issue? Or do we need to have some set of questions to start with? So this is really where you know, my mind goes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. And let me start by, if I may answer that question very directly. And I completely agree with you. Your mind must be open, but if you're completely open-ended, research becomes difficult because you need to structure it. So my view of asking an interesting research question, it's just two things. There are two tests you need to pass. First, and this is quite unabashedly a perspective coming from a very particular kind of social science, and there are other ways to do this, but I'm just posing one simple way, is to ask a question. What is a good question? A good question is one to which there is not a yes or no answer, number one. You know, and number two, a good question is one to which there is no ready available answer. If you already know the answer, don't ask the question. So that's the first thing. So, you know, don't do the research. Second, let's say you pose a question and you come up with an answer. I have a very simple test. I always tell my students this. You know, they're doing research, they get data, they run an analysis, and they say, oh, we figured this out. So I said, now you're going to go home. And what are you going to tell your parents? I went to this famous university and I took these classes. And I figured out, the example I'll give from Indian politics is that the BJP won because Mr. Modi is very popular, right? What would somebody say? Is that research? Because we already knew the answer to that. So that's the second test, which is the answer I'm coming up with. Is it an answer that anybody could have imagined? No, sometimes you can make interesting answers. So to me, you must ask a question to which A, there is no immediate answer available. In the empirical world, and I'll just stick to the empirical world for a moment, there are other worlds as well. In the empirical world, the good question must always have variance. There must always be before or after, less or more. There has to be some variance because you can try and explain the variance, first thing. And second, it must be a puzzle. It must be a puzzle, meaning that there is no immediate answer available. If there's an immediate answer available, if somebody can come up with an answer and knows the answer, it is not an interesting question. So to me, you're absolutely right. You have to be open-minded, but make sure that you think and come up with an answer that is actually something that surprises people, something other people have not thought about. And they say, aha, that's interesting. So I hope, sorry for the long answer to your short question.
No, sir, I think you're absolutely right. And, you know, as I sign off on this, you know, my mind goes back to what you said, sir, is eventually the answer should be leading to some insights, because often, you know, as people, researchers say that we are often informed about the answers or things, but we are never illuminated about the insights part of it. So I think, sir, you made a very good point. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Does anybody else has a question? Please put it up. I think it's turning out into an amazing session.
Okay. Alrighty. So why don't I move on?
Professor Chibar, I have a question.
Yes, sir. May I have your name, sir?
Yeah, I am Nachiketa Mittal. I'm a law teacher.
Yes, sir.
Right. So I understand, sir, that you talked about that how the research has to be done from heart, and we all have to wake up to the understanding that if we have some kind of intriguing question which might have been troubling us, and we would want to find answers to it, and then it can drive us. I do understand and recognize the fact. However, I have been grappling with one kind of problem ever since I entered into law teaching, that often I have seen that we are into a rat race to publish. And that tells me that sometimes we happen to do our research mechanically because we do not think from mind. We probably do not have done enough reading on a particular subject matter. However, we are pushed, right? I do understand the challenges because we all operate in different regulatory mechanisms and systems. So there can be certain challenges and requirements also.
Yes.
But in these times, how do we balance that? One, we need to do enough research, enough publications, because we need to get advanced into our career schemes. At the same time, some kind of research which is far more worthy of contributing in the particular discipline, society, and also generating new dimensions for the future scholars to think. So that's the dichotomy, that how do I am sort of torn apart in these two kind of, perspectives. That one is a mechanical part and one is that which is coming from the heart. So do you have any reflections on that?
I do, and let me answer that question. So much for my prepared talk. I hope that's okay, but I still have a prepared talk. I'll go through it. So I was not going to discuss this directly, but I will answer your question because I think it's a really important question. And this is where we get to the heart of how you define a research culture within a university. Now, there are mechanical answers to your question, and there are non-mechanical answers to your question. So the mechanical answers to your question, quite frankly, are the answers that some Norwegian universities and British universities have adopted. And the mechanical answers are, and this is an important process, that the university, in collaboration with the local, with their professors, so the law faculty, the humanities faculty, the people in liberal arts, you come up with a list of journals, and you come up with a list of university presses, and you say, if you get published in such and such journal, you will get so many points. If you get published in such and such journal, you will get fewer points or more points. So there's a mechanical way to do it. And you'll be surprised that the British system, the European, the Norwegian system, which I'm familiar with, that's what they do. Now, the American system doesn't do that. Some universities do it, but our system is slightly different. Our system is, and this is where the research culture becomes important, that the faculty evaluate the quality of the work. So you in the law faculty will say, okay, we think this is high quality work. And the university has to have enough trust that the law faculty is making a decision based solely on academic criteria. And the law faculty values that research as much as the university does, and is not doing it for, nepotism, favoritism, et cetera, et cetera. That's the other way to do it. And that's how our university works. So those are two possibilities. And I think anytime you're going to build a research culture for faculty to be a research being evaluated and published, I actually thought I would talk about in much more detail about that, but I'm not, but that's okay. But there you need to work in collaboration. The administration and the faculty have to work in collaboration to come up with acceptable standards. And those standards have to change. For example, if you're a starting research university, you cannot expect that all of a sudden my faculty within 5 years will get a Nobel Prize. I mean, it's a little bit difficult. So you need to come up with respectable standards. Assume that every few years we will revisit those standards as we become better at something or the other. So that's my slightly long answer to your question, but I think that's the way to answer it.
Right. Thank you so much.
Right. Okay. So moving on, so back to this issue of building a research culture within a university. So I've spoken about motivations, and thanks to Dr. Mittal, we spoke about extrinsic motivations as well, which is, at the end of the day, we're all living in a world in which we are going to be evaluated. Dr. Shastri, will, at the end of the day, as the vice chancellor, will be evaluating, listen, is the research quality of this particular unit or this particular faculty member actually good enough or not good enough? So and that can determine career advancement, as Dr. Mittal said. So in other words, there is clearly a sense of extrinsic motivations, but intrinsic motivations are also key. And research finds that people who have intrinsic motivations to do research, they actually have that yields happier and more satisfied scholars. Because if you are a scholar who's just doing research to publish things and to check boxes, you will actually never be a happy scholar. Now, I'm not saying just because you have intrinsic motivations, there should be no focus on extrinsic motivations. We need that. We also need to live. We also have lives. So I don't think we should deny the fact that extrinsic motivations are important. But I think intrinsic motivations are really, really important as well. How do you build these intrinsic motivations and extrinsic motivations? How do you balance the two? And I think that this is true for PhD scholars, this is true for younger scholars, and maybe true for more advanced scholars as well. First, how do you as an academic build an identity? Why did Dr. Shastri become such a well-known professor of Indian politics? Because he engaged with academic activities. He went to conferences, he writes books, he does research. I do the same thing. You're always engaged in academic activities outside your university. You're involved with national associations, you're all involved with international associations, you're involved with regional associations, you're writing for different kinds of people, you're collaborating with different kinds of people. That's what you're doing. So your identity as an academic is going to be determined by your engagement with the outside world. So that's the first thing. Second, and I cannot stress this enough, and I'm going to, I may lose a friend at the end of this after the next thing I'm going to say, just joking, but local cultures are also important. And what I mean by that is informal activities are really, really key. You must have peer-to-peer interactions. You must have departmental lecture series. You must have informal seminars. And these are important to developing a strong academic community. I'll talk about how these things should be done in a minute. But these local cultures to me are critical. And I'll give once again an example. We have an informal group called the South Asia Group where we meet and read each other's work, where we have outsiders come and present their work. And they will come, they will present their work. We will read the work beforehand. We will show up having read whatever the person wants us to read. We will then have a conversation, a respectful conversation about the person's work. So there we learn and the person learns. All academic work becomes better through engagement, conversation, interaction with each other. And to make our work better, we need to continually engage in this conversation. And I think at any university, these local cultures are really important. You need to have, you cannot do this sitting alone in a silo. You have to have seminars, lecture series, etc. And that's how you build a strong academic identity locally. Everybody should say, we want to go to Jagran Lake City University to actually present our work on X, because that's where we will get the most important feedback. Because everybody there is a serious academic. That's the kind of reputation one needs to develop. And if you have a strong internal culture, a strong local culture, that really helps. And of course, now I'm going to put Dr. Shastri in the spot. And I think here's where the administration can help. One of the reasons our local culture works is because we have seminar series where people come. We can pay for them to come. We can take them out to a meal, and we don't have to worry about it. The university pays for it. So in other words, there is some small amounts of money available to actually build this local research activity. And I think building that local research activity is really, really important so that individuals feel ownership of their ideas. Individuals feel that their academic identities are closely associated with this. But researchers also have responsibilities. That yes, there is, the university may give you some resources. Yes, you're developing this culture. But all researchers have a responsibility. And I think there are 5 kinds of responsibilities that every researcher has and should acknowledge. First is constructive criticism. Whenever we speak to people, we make sure that we are not criticizing their work by just telling them what is wrong. We actually engage in their research. We engage with the work and try and give them ideas to make their work better. That's the first thing. So in other words, if you're doing a PhD and you have PhD students, PhD people who are doing their PhD, and they present their work in a seminar, the idea is not to tear it down. The idea is, okay, maybe if you thought about this slightly differently, I think your work would be much better. It's just the constructive criticism is really important. Second, you must accept researchers, both the critics as well as the person presenting the work, accept and adapt to acceptable standards. Different universities and different ideas have standards. And I think it's very important that we accept and we adapt to those standards. That's really important. Third, and I think cannot say enough about this, research requires transparency. We have enormous efforts now in the social sciences here to make sure that all data sets on which research is based are made public and that research is transparent. What you've done, the methods you've used, the analysis you're doing is completely transparent and that other people can replicate it if necessary. So transparency is really important because the more transparent your research, the easier it is for others to engage with your work. You must also, and this I cannot stress enough purely intellectually, imbibe pluralism. And what do I mean by pluralism? There are many ways to answer a question. There are many ways to approach a question. There are many ways to think of a problem, and we need to acknowledge that different people can have different ways of answering the same question. And we should be willing to and work with and acknowledge those research differences in how people approach a question. Just because, for instance, there are many ways to study, say, for example, in my field, does leadership matter? You can study it quantitatively. You can study it through a journalistic perspective. You can study it from a management perspective by looking at how firms work. There are many ways to do this. And it would be unfair if one way was prioritized. And so therefore, if you're having a conference, let's say on leadership, you should be willing to acknowledge that there are multiple avenues for you to address and answer those questions. There are multiple ways to answer those questions. And finally, researchers should be willing to collaborate. You have to collaborate with each other. Most of my work these days is collaborative. I work with people. Why? Because you learn. You learn from working with people because there are people have ideas. People have ways of looking at things that you may not have thought about. But that collaboration becomes important and can only happen when there is transparency, when there is pluralism, and when there is constructive criticism, and we can all accept and adapt to acceptable standards. In other words, if you're producing work that's not up to a standard, you should be willing to say, no, maybe I should do something better to make my work a little bit better. So that, to me, these are the responsibilities of researchers in building a research culture. But what are the challenges? It's not that there are no challenges. And it would be remiss of me not to discuss the challenges. First, I don't know how many of you face, especially if you're writing a PhD or you're just starting out your careers, and if you're starting a research project in the social sciences and humanities, there is a possible lack of structure. And this is especially true for people starting their PhDs. Your time is your own. So maybe I'll do it tomorrow, maybe I won't do it today because there are no real deadlines. There's no classes you have to take. There's no exam you have to pass. You have to write a dissertation. You have to write. And writing and publishing can be challenging. Writing doesn't come easily to everybody. Only once you've written can you think about publishing something. But writing is difficult, can be a challenge to people. And the lack of structure is a challenge to people because, I'll do it tomorrow. I can think about it the day after, right? And especially when there is no structure. When you're in college and school, there's an exam. You have to take the exam, you have to pass the exam. And all of us in this room have been very good at taking exams and passing exams. That's why we are here. But now all of a sudden, we have to do things on our own time. And we have to write. And we have to put ourselves on the line. Keep in mind that whenever you're a researcher, whenever you're writing something, what are you doing? You are putting your ideas on the line. You're exposing yourself to criticism. You're exposing yourself to say, this is how X, Y, or this is how Pradeep thinks. How could he say that? How stupid could he be? How clever is that? Right? You'll get all kinds of reactions. But you are putting yourself out there. And that can be intimidating. That can be scary. This is why I think often when people are doing research, often and especially when students are doing their PhDs, and I have many, many students who are doing PhDs right now, or who have just started their careers, they have negative emotions. They're not so sure that this is what they should be doing. They think this is not for me. Am I good enough? Is my work interesting enough? We all have those doubts. Even I have those doubts now, even now when I write something. Is this really interesting? Is this important? Am I saying something trivial? And I think these are questions that live with us. And that's okay. But keep in mind that these are challenges that exist in any research enterprise. And we should acknowledge them and we should embrace them. And I think this is where I'll talk a little bit more about how universities and institutional cultures can actually help mitigate some of these negative emotions and issues of self-worth and doubt. But at the end of the day, if you don't have a collaborative intellectual space, research is going to become very difficult. I think one of the most amazing spaces of collaboration in Indian political science has been the work done out of Lokniti. And I think Dr. Shastri will say this to you, that the only reason it's successful is because there's a collaborative intellectual space that lies at the heart of that research enterprise. There are scholars from all over India who work with each other, who respect each other. They have their differences. They all have different perspectives on different political leaders. They all have different perspectives on political questions of the day, but they can all respect and work with each other. And if you think about it for a moment, that group has generated some of the most important findings in Indian politics. It has created a new journal, which is the leading journal for the study of Indian politics. And it has created a whole generation of scholars who can actually work and think about Indian politics in a different way. And the only reason is there's a collaborative intellectual space that lies at the heart of that. That's what makes a research culture really powerful and potent. Now, what should the administration do? I don't think the administration, if you're running a university, Dr. Shastri, I'm sorry, you're a friend, maybe you won't talk to me anymore after what I'm going to say, but I think we know what the university should be doing. The university should prioritize research in hiring and advancement, that I think everybody knows. The most important thing is research is rewarded. But this also means that for researchers in the university, there has to be an acknowledgement that research is rewarded and you may be rewarded differently. I'm not asking anybody to go to the American model in which there is no salary scale for a professor. Every professor makes their own salary depending on their publication to some extent and their market value. That's an extreme case. But at the end of the day, there are salary differentials, and those salary differentials will exist because research is rewarded and people who are doing research will have to be rewarded first. Second, I think it's really important for the university to provide research support so that faculty can actually do the research. These days, there have to be good library or journal facilities. There have to be places where people who don't do data work can go and have their data issues settled. Because I think one of the key things in most current universities is that there are data hubs where people can actually take their data, get help with data analysis, and provide other financial and administrative support as necessary. And the last part, which is psychological services, I cannot stress enough the importance of this, especially for PhD students. I think if you have PhD scholars, there have to be psychological services available for those students in case they're having difficulty with their research. So I think the administration also has to make some efforts, that it needs to prioritize research. Faculty have to understand, and researchers have to understand that some people's research may actually lead to differential treatments in advancement. Also, research support should be provided. And finally, I think psychological services need to be stressed, especially for PhD students, because I think those psychological services are something that are important, especially for people who are struggling and having extreme self-doubt. But why should we develop a research culture? That's the bottom line. And I think the reason we develop a research culture is because with the research culture, we can answer really, really important questions. Think of Amartya Sen's work on famines. When Amartya Sen wrote his famous book on famines, he pointed out a very simple fact, doing careful research, that famines don't exist because there's a shortage of food. In fact, famines happened not when there was a shortage of food, but in fact, when there was more food available grown than previously. Famines happened because the governments were not able to deliver that food where they needed it to be delivered. People didn't have the entitlements to get that food. And in the Bengal famines, people were dying outside storehouses, shops filled with food. So we always had this belief that, listen, why do people die in a famine? Because there's a shortage of food. No. There's a shortage of entitlement. There's plenty of food available. So that was an important finding. Take, for example, the current pandemic. And this is a really inspiring story. And I'm just going to read it to you. Everybody loves the RNA vaccines, mRNA vaccines that Pfizer and Moderna are using. And the person who's the researcher, Kathleen Carico, she spent the 1990s collecting rejections. She worked on mRNA. She couldn't get a paper published. And in fact, finally, the paper she got published, upon which all these things are based, is in one of the most lowly ranked journals in the field, along with her co-author. Her work attempted to harness the power of mRNA to fight disease, was too far-fetched for government grants, corporate funding, and even support from her own colleagues. It all made sense on paper. In the natural world, the body relies on millions of tiny proteins to keep itself alive and healthy, and it uses mRNA to tell cells which proteins to make. And her work was completely ignored. And now they're saying she's likely to get the Nobel Prize. She got the Lasker Prize, and she and her co-author. She believes in it. She cared about it. She pushed it. And it's really important because she was working in a culture where even though her own work was being marginalized, there were other people who were willing to work with her and support her. So that's first. Finally, and I'd like to conclude by saying that scholars who perceive themselves to be valuable members of the department or scholarly research cultures, they report better well-being, greater intellectual growth, and career advancements. So work and create a local research culture of respect. Create a local research culture in which you feel unafraid to present your ideas, no matter how good, no matter how bad. You know you will not be judged, but that people will work with you to make your ideas better. If you can do those two things, you can have a successful research culture that is built locally. And if you have researchers who are motivated by this intrinsic need to answer deep questions or answer important questions, that's how you can build a successful institutional research culture. And this, I think, is true for junior scholars, and some of these things apply to senior scholars as well. So I'll stop there and see if I take any questions. Do I have enough time? I'm done, right?
Pradeep ji, there are 3 questions which have come in the chat box.
Yes.
Where Anurag asks, one of the major problems is we grow through procrastination and face problems in time management. And I'd link that with the question from Girish Sharma, one of our PhD students, who is also an IAS officer. He says, dear professor, Do you think that reducing the time period for awarding a PhD would help to overcome procrastination? As Parkinson famously remarked, that work expands to fill the time available for its completion.
Yes.
And then we'll go to Priya's question once you respond to this question.
Okay. So how do you, these are difficult questions to answer. And I can tell you examples from what I do. I don't know if these are good answers. So I think procrastination is a problem that is common to all academics. To many academics, not all is too strong a word. It's a problem that's common to many academics. I have colleagues who do not procrastinate at all. They take this job much like a 9-to-5 job, and they work every day. And they work consistent hours. There are people like that. But other people are procrastinators, which means, and the reason is, we have the illusion that we are the masters of our time. Because, it's our work. We don't do it today, we'll do it tomorrow. Right? Oh, no, we'll do it the day after. It's okay. I can go shopping today. I can go to the movie today. Right? We do all this. I don't think the question is not reducing the time period. The question is not reducing the time period necessarily to answer the question rightly. I think the only way to make the PhD more efficient is to have regular conversations with your guide, which means there should be structured conversations between you and your guide, which says, and you have to not have a conversation, but you have to produce written work. If you don't produce written work, you don't have a conversation. And then there is the draconian side of this. The draconian side of this is that if you're not doing this work, the university should have the right to drop you. That if you're not made certain benchmarks by certain times, you can no longer be doing your PhD. So I think a lot of this depends on finding a supervisor or a guide who will actually work with you in enforcing these timelines. So I think that is one way to do it, but that is a relationship that you have to develop with your guide. I don't think one can come up with a good answer purely in the abstract. This varies from case to case. That's how I think about it, at least. But in the extreme case, if you don't produce X number of written work that a committee can approve, you should not be allowed to proceed to your PhD. That's a pretty strong incentive for people to finish, if that's what people want. But I think the conversation is a better way to approach it. Sorry, that was not a happy answer.
The linked question was, what are the key elements one should adopt when writing a paper? Because a lot of the PhD students are required to write papers. All of them have to write at least 2 papers before they submit their PhD, which has to be published.
Yes.
So their question is, what are the key elements we need to keep in mind from your experience? What are the key elements to be kept in mind to be able to write a good paper?
Okay, thank you. That's an excellent question. Again, like the previous one, I have an answer. I don't know if it is the answer. My answer is very simple. To write a good paper, you must have number one, and I'm once again going to use the empirical social sciences as an example. You don't have to follow this strategy. If you're writing in a different field, we can talk about how to do it. But first, you must have a problem that everybody acknowledges is a problem to answer. That's worth answering. There's a question worth answering. You must have that. That's the first way to write a paper. Second, and I think this is where your research skills become very important. You must read everything that is written on that subject. To me, a PhD is granted when you know more about one thing than anybody else in the world. Right? And the only way to do that is to make sure that whatever else people have written, you are completely aware of it. So first, you start with a question. I want to explore question A, whatever the question is. And by the way, that is the hardest part. In fact, Dr. Shastri knows this well. When we do the Lokniti workshops, we spend hours going through people's questions. Once you have the question right, or you have a reasonable question, you can then do the research to say, okay, what have other people said about it? And then what is my answer? So those are the three elements: a question, which you think is worth answering, and you and your guide think is worth answering. Second, what have other people said about this? And third, is my take, do you have a new take on this? Do you have a new answer for this? That's how I would think about it. And everybody can do this. It's not difficult, it's just hard.
Very interesting question, which I don't know whether you are supposed to answer or I am supposed to answer.
Anji.
What does a candidate do if the supervisor does not give the candidate enough time?
I think you should answer it, but I think I will answer it. I actually think that's a very good question. And I think the reason that's an important question is that is where building the research culture becomes important. That faculty have to realize, supervisors have to realize that they learn from their PhD students. Talking to their PhD students should be a source of joy and learning, not a job that you're doing. And I think you're failing your job as a guide if you are not motivating your students to answer interesting questions that will intrigue you as well. So I think there should be, and I will let Dr. Shastri off the hook this time, I think this is something that the department in which the person is has to resolve. The department should be in a position to say, the department head or a department committee should say, you are doing interesting and important work. If your advisor guide is not giving you time, we have to find somebody else to give you the time. I don't think this should be placed upon the higher administration, because once departments start solving these problems, they will start developing their own culture. In the last recourse, it's always the university's head who's responsible. But I think this is something that people should learn how to answer within themselves.
Possibly be the last question. Being passionate about your area of research can also bring a certain amount of bias about the outcome, as the researcher may have strong views about the issue. How can we manage or eliminate this bias is what Shruti wants to know. She's a PhD student we have.
Yeah. This is an extremely deep question. And I think I will give an answer which is simplistic. There is a deeper answer to this, which I don't think we have the time to discuss, but if you want, we can talk about it some other time. I think the only way to eliminate bias is for you as a researcher to be cognizant of your own biases. What is motivating you is the question. What is motivating you is a desire to come up with an answer to a question, right? Not to necessarily give an answer that confirms your bias, because if it confirms your bias, you haven't done your job. So to give you a straightforward answer, if you are coming up with an answer that is confirming your bias, you're probably making a mistake. Or you're probably not asking the right question. So that's what I would say. It's not that researchers don't have biases. It is not that researchers don't have ways of thinking about things. That's one. Number two, you will keep your bias at check if you present your work to a diverse audience. You're in a department where there are many people who think differently, who think about the same question in very different ways. They will call you out. As long as they do it respectfully, you will learn how to keep your bias at the door. So rely on your colleagues. Once again, local research cultures are the key. As long as there's a respect in them, there's a respect for open inquiry in which you're not actually bullying anybody or putting people down or making unnecessary criticisms. There will always be, by the way, we are academia. There will always be people like that. The idea is to ignore them and to understand them and just let them go. There will be some heartburn. But at the end of the day, you must develop that respectful culture. And for that, and I'll say this honestly, the pressure has to come from the senior faculty within departments. They have to lay down the law and say, we will not backbite. We will not do this. You shouldn't do the same either. Once you set that tone and that culture, departments have to do it. University administration can't do this for you. And once that happens, you will start having more respectful conversations. And I'll say this, I do not gossip about my colleagues. I do not gossip about my students to one to the other. All students are the same. All my colleagues are the same to the students. I never say whatever I think of them is for myself. Whatever I think of a student's work is for myself. I will never pit one student against the other, never gossip about my students. As a result, whenever we have a conversation, people are willing to show up and give constructive criticism without fear of being judged. So I think that's the key. Faculty have to take the lead and take responsibility locally for creating this culture.
At the start of your talk, I had said that my colleagues will be having the benefit of a feast of ideas. I think the banquet you provided everybody, if I see the responses coming now, there is a sense of awe, there is a sense of amazement that my colleagues are experiencing, listening to what you said. But I'm going to suggest to my IT team that all the 3 general plenary lectures and the faculty plenary lectures should be up on our website at the earliest, so that not just those who are part of this dialogue, but anybody should be able to hear what was said. And for those who attended the dialogue, I think the opportunity to go back to these lectures would be very, very useful. Pradeepji, the fact that you spoke with such honesty, with a very transparent simplicity, and spoke out of your years of experience, would have definitely convinced my colleagues that there are so many layers to the whole question of a research culture. And I think you very, very beautifully handled what many would call very uncomfortable questions and issues. You handled uncomfortable questions. You presented issues which are generally not spoken about openly as part of your main presentation. And I think that demonstrates in important ways the conviction with which you spoke and the conviction that you carry for all that you said. In important ways, for my doctoral students, Pradeep ji should be like a role model for them to follow in terms of how, even after so many years of being a researcher, even today, Pradeep ji asks himself every day as to what is the next work that I should come up with. There is never a year which passes without an important work being authored by him or published by him. And this is over and above all his other responsibilities of teaching and the like within the university. And I must also add that I have seen and experienced his, and you have experienced it today, his capacities to engage with an audience and his capacities to keep a classroom alive. Now, I would just highlight 2-3 points which Pradeep ji made for the benefit of my colleagues. Pradeep ji, though working in an American university, understands the local reality in Indian universities. And that was reflected in his presentation. Jagran Lake City University is a university which is now 8+ years old. In the beginning, we focused on our teaching programs, on stabilizing our undergraduate and postgraduate programs, and slowly have moved towards focusing on research. And I think many of the insights, Pradeep ji, that you provided, if all of us think of those things seriously, we will have the answer to some of the challenges that we are facing in some of the interventions that you made as part of your presentation today. And you are right, as a university, we want to incentivize research. We do have a policy of incentivizing faculty who do publish in Scopus journals and UGC Care journals. We do have an annual review of each faculty. And Pradeep ji, you will be happy to know that this process of review has begun from the top.
Excellent.
As the Vice Chancellor, I laid down what is my roadmap for the next 1 year. And this I made public to all my faculty and told them at the end of the 1 year, you can ask me questions about what I said is my roadmap. And you have every right to question any aspect of my roadmap which is not completed. And then our deans did that. Then our heads of the department did that. And then we got our faculty to do that. Now, in a sense, what you said in your presentation, getting people to take ownership for the responsibility of building this research culture is something that we have tried our best to be able to do. And finally, on the question which was raised by one of my colleagues, how do you ensure that guides give time to their students? I think we at Jagran Lake City University have made it a very, 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 very transparent policy. Our PhD students have a right to approach the authorities in the university, the heads of departments when they face a challenge. We have developed, as you said in the beginning, we have developed a mentor scheme. Our PhD students who are in their first year of coursework are attached to certain mentors to discuss issues with them. And what we have tried to do is the mentor does not belong to the faculty that they are doing their PhD in, because anyway, the faculty is somebody they will meet at regular frequencies. Ria, can you please mute yourself? Okay. What we have also done is we have a center for self-development where we have a very vibrant counseling center whose services are available to all our students, PhD students, undergraduate students, postgraduate students. So what you mentioned as part of your opening point is very much part of our efforts. Thank you, Pradeep ji, for sparing this time. And just for the benefit of my colleagues, it's now around 11:30 or 12 at night in Berkeley. And Pradeep ji has stayed awake to be with us in this session. And thank you so much for that, Pradeep ji. And we truly cherish and value your friendship, and Jagran Lake City University looks forward to having you more frequently, both online and offline with us. Any concluding words from you, Pradeep, before we end the session?
I just want to thank Jagran Lake City University, Dr. Shastri, Dr. Joshi, and for all the amazing and difficult questions you posed. I think research is an ongoing process, and building a research culture is an ongoing process. And I think with Dr. Shastri at the helm, you're in good hands. So congratulations to the university for doing such an amazing job at building yourself into such a powerful university within such a short span. So congratulations to all of you.
Thank you so much, sir, for words of wisdom and insightful words for the scholars, for the faculties, and for everyone. Even as I am actually working in 3 different areas, and as a different 3 roles, as a guide, supervisor, research director, itself a researcher. So you have already spoken that you should be an adaptive in nature in different way. So thank you very much, sir. It should be a very insightful session from your side. So at your end, I hope this session will be very helpful for all the researchers, faculties, and supervisors as well. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
I now request to all the participants to remain seated. We will begin with the first plenary session from 11:45. We are inviting Dr. Vinit Kapoor, IPS Deputy Director, Madhya Pradesh Police Academy, Bhopal. The session will be chairing by Dr. Ma'am, and the topic with Shelja Shastri Ma'am, and the theme will be evidence-based policy making and the pandemic models of research through the synergies between the practitioners and academicians. So be seated now. Thank you very much. So we will meet after 15 minutes. Thank you very much.